Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So I have hit a momentary snag on my pansy project, and I have to wait a couple days for some supplies to come in for the capelet. Now instead of just going straight to the skirt like I originally thought I would, I've decided to hold off on that for tonight as it is currently 10 p.m. and I don't think I could currently do any pattern alterations that I need to do for the skirt. So tonight I'm instead going to be working on a project that I don't have to do a lot of mental gymnastics with, and that is making a petticoat. If you've been around my channel since I think 2019, you will have probably seen this glorious stripy petticoat. So I love this petticoat. I was just planning on wearing this petticoat underneath my new 1890s project. I tested the petticoat under the fabric and realized the fabric was a bit too sheer and the stripes showed quite easily through the fabric. So I was perusing through this book, which if you don't have it, I definitely recommend you get it for your library. It is Costume in Detail from 1730 to 1930. It is line drawings of historical costumes with very in-depth detail. It's a great book. There's no patterns, but it's great as a secondary resource. So on page 266, there is a petticoat here. So according to the description in this book, the petticoat is a brilliant orange, stiff, watered silk taffeta. And although my fabric is not a taffeta and a cotton instead, because right now that's a bit more budget friendly, I figured why not make a delightfully colorful petticoat. I think I have about 6 meters of fabric, and my fabric is 45 inches wide. So we'll see how this goes. It's going to be a very relaxed video. I really just want to focus on getting things moving and just keeping my momentum up for this project so I can get it done in time. So without further ado, let's get to cutting. The pattern I'm using for this petticoat is the same one I used on my last 1890s petticoat, which is the skirt pattern on page 63 of the Authentic Victorian Fashion Patterns. The pattern is fairly straightforward and consists of 3 pattern pieces. The front is cut on the fold, and the remaining 2 patterns are cut on the double. I shortened my pattern by about 10 inches so I could add a ruffle to the bottom. These patterns are drafted without seam allowance, so as usual I am using my magnets to make it easier to cut the seam allowance out quickly. Welcome to day 2 of the project. So last night I finished cutting out all the panels, and today I'm going to be cutting out the ruffles and then hopefully starting to put this thing together. So let's get to it. For my bottom ruffle, I cut it 10 inches wide and on the lengthwise grain. I like to cut my ruffles lengthwise because I like the way they sit. If you didn't know, ruffles actually have a different appearance depending on how they're cut. And if you want to read more about that, I will leave a link to a blog post down below that has more information. Once the ruffles were all cut out, I then set them aside and began working on the body of the petticoat. First up, I marked the darts in the front and side panels with my tracing wheel and then added chalk on top to make the lines more prominent. With all the darts pinned, it was time to sew them. Now, I know you are supposed to tie off darts at the point when you are sewing them instead of backstitching. I don't know about you guys, but I've never really noticed a difference, and most times I feel like I just can't be bothered. So let me know down below if you notice a difference and if you tie off your darts or if you backstitch them. With all the darts in place, I then began putting the pieces of the skirts together. Now, I decided to stitch all my seams with French seams, so I began by placing all the skirt pieces together with the wrong sides facing each other. On day 3 of the project, it was time to finish off the top of the petticoat. I cut a 2.5 inch wide strip of bias and pinned it in place. Once I had stitched it all the way around, I then went back and edge stitched along the seam allowance for a nice clean finish. And then I added 2 buttonholes at the center back of the petticoat for the drawstring opening.
Some days buttonholes just do not want to work, and today was one of those days. That is so bad. I think it's time for me to get my machine serviced. Okay, moving on.
After trying to fix the buttonholes and miserably failing, I measured out 2 lengths of 1/2 inch twill tape and then attached them to the seam allowance at the sides of the skirt. I stitched back and forth several times in the seam allowance to make sure this was very secure, as this is going to have a lot of strain on it. Once I was happy with the stitching, I then turned the waistband facing over and pinned it in place, and then carefully stitched the waistband in place, taking care not to catch the ties as I stitched.
Okay, I am done the base of my petticoat, and now it's time to add the ruffles. So according to my calculations, I have enough material to do about times 1.5 for the bottom ruffle, and for the second tier ruffle, I think I have just under 1.5. Hopefully that is correct, because I don't have any more material. If not, we shall figure something out, but either way, wish me luck. So let's get to it.
First off, I started by stitching the lengths of the bottom ruffle together by using a French seam. Once all the lengths of fabric were sewn together, I then attached the ends together, creating a circle. Now, it's very important not to have a twist in the ruffle at this step, or else you will be pulling out a seam ripper sooner versus later. Don't ask me how I know this. With the ends sewn, I then began the task of hemming all 330 inches. Once the hem was done, it was finally time to start adding the gathering stitches. Now, I divided my ruffles up into 1/8 so it would make it easier to gather everything up. I definitely recommend doing this if you have a lot of fabric you need to gather. With the gathering stitches in, I then lined up all the marks and pinned it with the wrong sides facing each other. Once the ruffle was gathered down to the correct length, I then finessed the ruffle by using a technique called stroking the gathers. This is just done by running a pin along the gathers to evenly spread them out. And finally, to finish off the raw edge of the ruffle, I added some lace to cover it and stitched it in place for a nice clean finish. And now, without further ado, it's time for the reveal. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for joining me to the end. It was definitely a quicker project, but it was something to keep the momentum going, which is exactly what I needed. Now, I'm not quite done this petticoat yet. I saw this picture of this petticoat at the Met Museum, and I would love to add that kind of ruffle to my petticoat. But because time is limited right now, I decided I would hold off until I had more time to do that, because that means I could also dye this embroidered fabric that I have here to match my petticoat. For now, I love how it looks. It's very comfortable, it's very flowy, and it's nice to have another petticoat in the stash. Now you may have noticed that I also have a matching corset cover. So this was a very quick project, and I'll be showing you how I did it next week in a short. This one is actually based off a corset cover from 1906, so it's a bit out of the time period that I'm working in, but I feel cute and I'm gonna wear it anyways. That is all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye!